Let me briefly tell you the profile of Mr. Raghuraman Ramakrishnan. Mr. Raghuraman is a senior supply chain operation and is also over 3 decades of experience, and he has spearheaded large greenfield distribution centers, startups, as well as large number of chain transforming initiatives in India, Indonesia, and Europe when he was in Unilever. And he's also an experience in building and leading large teams that energize the challenge to create lasting business value. His experience of leading large and small teams is what he's going to be sharing with us this evening. Let me also have the privilege of introducing Mr. Lakshminarayan Pandit, is called as quickly YVL Pandit. Mr. Pandit is highly accomplished business leader, having held business leadership positions in reputed companies across several industries, both India and abroad. And Mr. Pandit is a certified professional certificate coach from International Coaching Federation and MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. It's indeed a privilege to welcome Mr. Pandit, who joined us as a special invitee for this evening. He'll be interacting with the speakers this evening during the program. Let me also have the privilege of introducing one of our distinguished invitees who always admire him for his qualities of administration, qualities of leadership styles, and who always thinks how we can really empower the human potential is our Krish Shankar. Krish Shankar is the Executive Vice President of Group Head of HRD and also the President of NHRD. NHRD is the one which deals with human potential resources all around India, and all the HR managers deal with them, and they are running some excellent initiative during the International Mental Health Day. Krish is Executive Vice President, Group Head of Human Resources from Infosys. Krish holds a postgraduate degree from XLRI Jamshedpur and has received an Executive Certificate Strategy organized in Stanford Graduate School of Business. And his insight and his interacting is going to be a very, very inspiring thing for this evening. Very welcome to you, Ms. Krish. And let me have the privilege of also introducing Mr. G. Prakash. Prakash is 28 years of field operations, maintenance, and quality. Let me have the picture of Prakash. Yes, he's a general manager, manufacturing in Toyota Kirloskar Auto Parts, Bangalore. And he has had a stint of about 2 years exposure at the head office in Toyota Motor Corporation of Japan and the field production, engineering, and planning. And that insight will going to be really help us in the talk what is happening this evening. And currently is the chairman, manufacturing expert committee of the Bangalore Chamber of Industries and Commerce. And we also have with us chairman of the session, Mr. Balraman. And Balraman, as you all know, is a mentor, guide, coach. And Mr. Balraman is former MD and past president of Madras, former MD of Ponds Limited, and is also former president of Madras Management Association for a period of 2 years. And we are indeed delighted and blessed that special initiative. Sundar, please mute your phone, please. Mute your. Thank you. And Sundar, please mute yourself.
Very good, very good. Super.
Sundar. Sorry, gentlemen. One of my team members only, the violators. I'll sort out that later. And he's an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad and former director of Hindustan Lever and MD from Ponds. And he's been taken a lot of initiatives happening in MMA, and he's been driving us. And I always compare him with, I had a boss in Air Force who was the chief of the air staff, and he used to push me like that and bring the best, and he will give the thing and always thinking, and he will give me a call first thing in the morning. And I have a lot of resemblance. That's why I love working with Balraman, because he's the one who will give me early morning calls. And I respond to him, and it's a great initiative, and it's really fun working with him to bring some outstanding events and outstanding initiatives in MMA. Thank you, Mr. Balraman, for all the support. Now I request Mr. Balraman to please introduce the subject and take it forward. Mr. Balraman.
Thank you, Group Captain. Of all the sessions we have had 17 so far. This is the 18th session. This one is, I think, of very, very high importance. This really conveys the secrets of getting the very best out of people, regardless of what field you work on with the people, whether it is in the army, in the battlefield, or whether it is playing a sport or a game in a sports field, or in the government, or in the business. Today's speakers are speaking with examples from the shop floor, but the principles they talk about are equally applicable in the head office and regional offices of a company as well. For human beings are the same. And Raghuraman is along with his very, very illustrious colleagues on the interacting panel, talking based on behavioral principles. He's explaining, how to get the very best out of people. And I think this is important, no matter what your area of life or work is in. So, without wasting much time, may I invite Raguraman to start.
Thanks, Mr. Balraman, and thanks, Group Captain. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to share some of my experiences, and also welcome to all the participants. I know you're spending an hour here. We'll make it as interesting as possible. So I'll, without much ado, I'll start the topic. Just one minute, let me just share my screen. Can you hear me?
It's a slideshow. Yes, perfect, sir.
Okay, good. Group Captain, if there's any challenge, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll just keep going through the slides. Basically, this topic, let me first introduce the topic a bit, and then we will get into the, some of the ideas. So first is, we have listened to various people from the, as Mr. Balraman said, there's already 17 people who have spoken, and this is the 18th in the series. And we have listened to many, senior leaders speak about their own experiences. And if you were to summarize everything we have heard, it all boils down to the, the importance of culture and leading the organizations with a lot of, purpose. And it also comes down to leading oneself with a lot of purpose. I guess it basically boils down to these things, which actually creates, creates value and helps us to create, charter new territories. Yeah. So that's a large one. While this is something which is very relevant for the people who are higher up in the organization and who are in leadership positions. I guess the question we are trying to address today and explore today is how does it matter? How do these principles and how do these thoughts matter to the people who are lower down in an organization? And that's what it is. And just to give us a sense of perspective, I guess depending on the kind of organization, a number of the people in the top to the people in the trenches, if you were to just do a simple number, whether it's a manufacturing organization, organized, unorganized, or an IT organization, whatever it is, or an army, the ratio between the people in the top and the people in the trenches is anywhere between 20 to 1:100. Yeah, that's the kind of ratios which happen. So, while we have some set of principles which the world has really embraced for the people who are in one, what happens to the people in the 20 or the 50 or the 100, and how does it work? I think is that which we are trying to explore today as we go ahead with this conversation. Yeah. Before this, let me confess, I am not a HR professional. I come from the line, all my experiences about leading people on the ground. So it's a bit more of personal experiences and not really theory. So that's what it is, but I hope it all connects and well in the end. Just to very quickly give you some sense, I think I should remove this, right? I'm not sure why I'm unable to take it out.
Continue.
Okay. So just a quick sense of my journey and not to take much time. I started my career with Larsen & Toubro, then spent almost bulk of my career after that has been in HUL one way or the other. But I first started with the Ponds division of HUL and I spent almost 6-7 years there, starting with Chennai and then with Pondicherry and a lot of roles, both in factory running and technologies. Bulk of my people principles were learnt there, and I really thank all my mentors who went out of the way to teach us these philosophies of how do we deal with people, and that's where it was formed. Then I was a part of the Unilever team, HUL team, building some of the largest factories for HUL in greenfield locations. Then I went into the supply chain end-to-end supply chain integration area. Then worked in Indonesia, creating some of the. This is actually the picture here is of a 12 football field sized distribution center, one distribution center catering to almost 15,000 crores of turnover. And then I was in Unilever Europe running logistics. This is very briefly about me, but bulk of my career has been in Unilever before I joined ITC very recently. So that's my background, and this is where I have learned whatever I'm sharing with most of you. So from there, just to get into if you have to really take a step back and look at what people told us, at most at every stage, what people have done is to look at, take a less traveled path, whether it is in terms of personal decisions, the way they have led their teams, or the way they have led their organizations into something which is uncharted. We have heard various people explain, and each one of those places, people have taken some uncharted or road less traveled, and that's what has helped them to blaze the trail. It's not doing more of the same, but doing things a bit differently. So again, in this space of human potential and unlocking human potential, I guess there are common ways in which there's a typical path in which we deal with it. And when I say human potential, it includes a person who's driving your auto rickshaw, or a person who just comes to repair an AC in your house, or a plumber or electrician, everyone, and also in our organizations, in our professional life, in our personal life, everywhere. There's a particular way in which we deal, the common way in which we deal with people. And there is a different way in which a few people deal with people. And I think the difference again comes in, that is my belief and that's my learning. And that's what we will touch upon. I'll first, this is a book which many of you may have heard. This is a book which was written by a person called Daniel Pink. And this is a research, came out of his research in the area of organizational behavior and people behavior. And this is one of the most watched YouTube videos. That's why I just put it. And it's a very common thing, which is about, and he actually shared this in his book called Drive, which was basically about saying what drives human beings, what really helps them to perform, and what helps unlock value in people. So his, after a lot of things, his final proposition was to say, our common mindset is to look at everything as what is reward and what is punishment, or what is carrot and what is stick. You give a carrot and you get more of the behavior you want. You put a stick and you get less of a behavior you want. That's basically a carrot and stick approach, or a reward and punishment approach. And that's a common way in which we always look at people. And especially as we go lower down in an organization, the carrot and stick approach is even more pronounced. So the question is, his study was there to say that, while that's the common approach, what really happens is, the three things which matter most to people based on various experimental studies they had done across the world. His hypothesis was to say that three things drive performance. One is autonomy, which is the freedom to do what people want to do, and that autonomy empowers them. The second is the mastery, which is about how do you continuously push the boundary and how do you stretch yourself. And, if today this is your, there's some way by which, you expand the box in which you are today operating. It's in terms of getting a skill, it's about achieving something which you have not done till now, which actually makes you feel that you have become a bigger person. Yeah, that's the second one, which is mastery. And third is purpose, doing something, not just a drudgery, but there's something larger thing which is beyond me, which I'm trying to achieve, and I'm a part of that. I'm sure all of us have heard the story of someone went and asked a guy, what are you doing? And he said, I'm cutting a stone. While someone else said that I'm building the best temple in the world. And who is likely to be more motivated? The person who thought he's cutting stone, or the person who is building best temple in the world? And that's purpose, which is making us connect to something larger than that immediate day-to-day drudgery which we all go through in life. I think that's basically what he said is what drives performance, and this is what really motivates people. But then the question is, while this is all very good and it's all, everyone understands that this is what is important for people higher up in an organization, billions of dollars have been spent in leadership development, and there's a significant progress in this area across the world, including in India. The question is, how does it appear to people who are lower down in an organization or lower down in Maslow's triangle? And how do you actually help them? How do these things work for them? That's basically what we will try to talk about today. Why is this topic relevant? I think that's equally a very important thing. I'm having a difficulty in moving the slide. Just a minute. Yeah. Why is this topic important? I think that's in my personal view, and I think most of us understand this. If bulk of our economy and if bulk of our people are actually working in these things, and those are the hands and legs which actually make the wheels of economy move. it is our fundamental responsibility to actually make them productive and unlock their talent and unlock their potential, because it is that which actually, one, creates the economic well-being which we all aspire for, a $5 trillion task or make in India, whatever it is. In order to unlock that, it is in that layer of the society that we need to go and unlock. It not only unlocks the economic value by unlocking their potential, it also brings meaning to their own lives. And I think that's an equally a big responsibility for people in leadership positions. And so it's a once in a lifetime opportunity for all of us. I think we have a population which is young. All of us know about the population dividend which India is sitting through. And therefore, this is the time for us to make that contribution and make an impact and difference in the lives of a large number of people, which eventually has an economic consequence for us, which is what we all want. At the same time, it has a very positive social and a well-being consequence also as a society. So therefore, it's something which is of paramount importance for both economic and social perspective. Yeah. I'll start with a simple hypothesis, and then we will get into some of the lessons which I've learned. I think, there's been a lot told about leadership, and there's been a lot of conversations about what is the purpose of leadership, what is leadership, what is it all about. For me, I thought a very simple way to frame it is to say that, the purpose of leadership today, at least, is not just to make money, but it's actually to make meaning. Do we need to make money? Do we need to create economic value? Absolutely, yes. We have to earn the right to live. But then that's only a very small part of what is it that we want to do. But a much larger thing is, in addition to that, we need to make meaning. We need to make meaning for ourselves, for the enterprises we lead, and for our consumers, for our customers, for the society at large, and for every employee who works with us. When we are able to make it meaningful for them, I guess we eventually create that virtuous spiral of value, virtuous spiral of engagement, which eventually creates sustained both economic value as well as social value in the long run. So the purpose of leadership, the hypothesis is, how do you actually create meaning for the people who work with you, who work for you, who are your customers and everyone else? Yeah. So that's where I start with. The first lesson, therefore, in this, in unlocking human potential, needless to say, I'm not going to delve deep on this topic, because this topic in itself deserves a separate, I think, 1 hour, and we will not get into that. It's a very detailed topic, and I some very interesting lessons in this, but we will not get into that space. But I guess one of the most important things, obviously, is to recruit the right people. Those of you who understand Tamil can see this Kural, which is a very, very, someone wrote, Thiruvalur wrote this 2000 years back, which explains the entire concept of identifying the right people and getting the right people to do a job. This topic has been discussed extensively. It is there in Jim Collins' book. It has been there everywhere. All of us who lead teams know that we need the right person, and only then things can happen. I guess, this is one of the important things, and many successful organizations have developed their own ways of doing this, which is vital. And I'm here assuming, first of all, that for some reason we have brought in the right people. Yeah. But then equally, I want to, one of the questions which one of my mentors asked me once is, Raghu, have you ever seen a guy who is 21 or 22 years old who joins a company and says, oh, good, I now got a job. Now from today, I am going to create trouble for this company. Let me go create a strike. Let me start a union. Let me make everyone's lives mess. Is there anyone who joins a company at the age of 21 or 22 with that in his mind? And if that's not what is the common phenomena, what is it that we have done to them that after 10 years or 20 years, that's what people land up becoming? People lose their motivation and they become unmotivated. Is it that the people have a problem, or is it that we as leaders have an issue? That's basically the question. And, even if you have the right person on the ground, we need to do a lot of other things in order to keep that person productive, in order to keep that person wanting to contribute more, learn and develop further and further. Yeah. So we'll look at some of the things which I have learned in the process. I think the first thing is about purpose. Yeah. I think any organization needs to have a purpose. And we need not just to have a purpose in our mind as leaders, but most importantly, to communicate that purpose of the organization into the teams whom we lead, irrespective of what level they are in, and make them feel that they are a part of that mission. They are a part of that purpose which the organization is leading. I'm sure many of us have heard this famous story of, even a janitor in the NASA lab said, "What are you doing?" I'm helping land a person on moon. Yeah, so that's a very famous story of purpose. But equally, I would like to share some of our personal experiences. This I have personally seen, experienced in ponds when I was running one of the factories. So I want to share a specific example of this to bring it alive. I know most of us who run good factories today have safety is a very, very important part of our operational rigor. And we say that one of the big purposes of the factory is not just to make money or be productive, but also to run a very safe operation, which is good for the employees. We do not want a single person coming to our factory get hurt. Yeah, it's literally a purpose of why the factory is there, and that we actually share that with people and we try to drive it. I actually want to share a personal example where many of us have seen, many of us may remember this incident. In the year 2004, there was a fire accident in Kumbakonam in one of the schools, and unfortunately, many kids, elementary school kids, were charred to death. It was one of the most gory accidents, and it actually shook the entire country in terms of what happens and the safety standards in schools and how things happen. When we were running after that, the factory was having a typical safety committee meeting immediately after that, and many of the employees, we used to run a very, very strong safety program. Many of the employees used to feel very strong, and they felt very strongly about it, because many of them, when it's about 20 years back, many of them had kids who were going to school at that time, and they said, look, even in the schools in which our kids go, the similar problem is there. And the school safety standards are bad, and we know these are the issues. We have seen cables flying around. We have seen exits blocked. The workmen then took a day off. The factory helped them. They formed small teams which went around to all the schools in that area, especially the schools where their own kids were going. Voluntarily ran safety audits and presented their findings to the schools and said, look, these are the things you need to do in order to improve the safety in your place, so that the similar accident which happened there doesn't happen in this school as well. It is so well received. Yeah. But the point of enacting this story is, it's one thing to keep, beating down the point of safety and then saying it's a KPI, you have to achieve this KPI, and putting this thing and then starting putting punishment to people if they're not safe, issuing warning letters and all that. It's another thing to make them feel that this is important. It's not a KPI to be achieved, but it's a social mission in which I need to contribute. When that happens, when that shift happens in people, that is when a purpose of the factory gets translated into the identity of the person. Once that becomes the identity of a person, then you never have to once more go and stand behind the person and supervise. He thinks safety, he integrates safety into whatever he or she does in the house, in the office, the way they travel to work, in whatever they do. They live and breathe safety. And I think this was a classic example in my personal life of, a purpose of an organization getting transmitted into way of living of people, and how it provided meaning to them, and how it changed their identity of driving safety. Yeah. So the first thing is to drive purpose in people. The next one I wanted to touch upon was, the second powerful lesson is the power of self-worth. And this is a very famous saying by an architect which said, even a brick wants to be something. I think in each one of us is a very strong innate desire to lead meaningful lives, to lead. All of us want to feel worthy. Each one of us want to feel worthy. It's an innate drive. It doesn't matter who we are and what level of the society you are in. You respect a person, you get a different level of performance, and you treat him as one more tree in the forest, and you get a performance which is very, very different. having that personal attention to each person and giving them that sense of self-worth, I guess, is one of the most important ways to unlock values in people. Um, I would argue that this is something which many of us often overlook simply because there is so much of work pressure and there is so much of, there's so many deadlines to be met and everything. But realizing that everyone has this innate need in them and just tapping into that makes such a big difference. I would, bring there is a lot of research which has happened on this topic subsequently of late, especially in the last 10 years or so, where the concept of psychological safety has become extremely important. And today is mental health day, World Mental Health Day, and I think it's an apt topic. Psychological safety is fundamentally around I bringing myself to the job, I having the confidence that I don't have to be someone else. I can be me. I have my own blemishes. I'm not a perfect person, but I have something to contribute, and I am allowed to bring that myself into the job as a whole human being and contribute. How do I understand that person on the other side as a whole human being, his potential, his talents, and how do I help him unlock? Someone may be extremely good at something. Someone else may be extremely good at something else. There's nothing else that person, and it may be a very, very few things, but there's always something where they can be unlocked, and there's always something where we can engage them and make them get that sense of self-worth. And when they find that self-worth from a leader, when that sense of self-worth is met by a leader, I think they start warming up to that person. They start forming up. If that work environment provides that sense of self-worth, they warm up to that environment and they start contributing. Many examples. Someone is extreme. I'm just giving some examples arbitrarily. Yeah? Someone is good only at gardening and there is no other skill. As is a very unskilled person, his only other skill is gardening. Maybe he has done some field work or whatever it is. Can we, in his discretionary time, use him to do some work in garden and make him feel that there is something which he has contributed to. I still remember in my factory, we used to have a person whose biggest, only other passion and skill was to make rangoli. And, every time there was an opportunity in the factory, we will make him do a rangoli. The person starts getting that sense of attachment to that factory. I'll actually show one of the pictures subsequently. It's these things, everyone has some potential. How do we look at that? How do you unlock that? How do you create that sense of belonging, which then helps them to become more and more attached to that place and contribute more and more to the team? And because the environment is one where there's a lot of psychological safety and their self-worth is realized in that place. I think that's one of the most important things. I want to share a small personal example. It is not just for, making a rangoli or, making a garden, but this is what goes on to create huge business economic value. Many of you have seen this product. Is a very famous, Pond's talcum powder. And most of it is available. It was always available only in large packs, which is 150 grams, 100 grams, and 400 grams was the standard pack sizes in which these products were available. It's about a 15-year-old story. The first time we wanted to come up with low unit packs. India as a country is very, very deep in low unit packs, and that's where shampoo sachets are very famous. The 50 paisa, 1 rupee, the lower end packs is where almost every company has leveraged to penetrate because people want to use good products, but they can't afford large put down prices, and people prefer smaller sachets because of that. But then producing a large product is a completely different ball game as compared to producing 20 grams of talcum powder. And sachet machines are simple to make and they are very easy to implement, but making a line to run low unit packs of talcum powder, which is a powder to be filled, is extremely complex. And to get the economics right was very, very different. We had to create lines which ran at 2.5 times the speed of the bigger bottles and which used less than half the people as the bigger bottles. That's the only way to make economic value. Otherwise, it was not just going to be viable to launch this pack. A team of workmen actually solved a completely complex engineering feat, and they finally helped to launch this entire product, which actually today, 15 years down the line, is as large a category as the main pack. So that sense of self-worth just doesn't go. It is actually a mission of the entire factory to solve this problem, because they felt this is what is required to secure the future of the factory and make a meaning. And so it is not just about making people feel good, but to create completely new categories in itself in business, which then go on to create huge economic value. Therefore, the sense of self-worth and how do we learn how to unlock it is very important. One company which actually has mastered this art globally at scale, you're talking about thousands and thousands of people, and still, being really, really working at a completely different level, actually is Toyota. I now invite Mr. Prakash, who is a part of the panel, to actually share some of his stories of how a company like Toyota actually looks at this space and the structure they follow to unlock this. Prakash?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Raghuragam. And good evening to all of you. So I think Mr. Raghuragam has touched upon, various aspects which I was able to visualize from a bird's view, that what all things are happening in my company. I think what he has put it very rightly. And when I try to summarize that, I think it comes out from my experience of this. And before that, I think the topic which was chosen is very, very interesting also, unlocking human potential from a non-HR manager. Now, in my company, there is a department called as HR department, but as an HR manager, we generally believe that everybody is an HR manager in our company. The reason is whoever has got subordinates, I think he becomes a HR manager. So in our company, we call every frontline supervisor as a HR manager. The reason is he needs to take care of his people. That's a fundamental belief or value system, you can say. So what I would like to just give you an overview about the so far the topic which Raghuraman explained, and from Toyota viewpoint, what are those things? So just it comes out as a two important thing. One is, of course, commitment to beliefs, philosophies, and common values. And I think in my last 25 years of experience in working with Toyota has been, which comes out as a Toyota way. Of course, I think every company has their own way, but I think you might be seeing in the slide, it is written as 2001. It's a very interesting, information as to why this 2001 came. It's not about any version of 2001. It's actually the Toyota way was coined in 2001. The background is very simple. Toyota was a global company even by then, but one thing which was missing was on its DNA. The DNA was actually in Toyota is actually passed down from, like what we say in India, Guru Shishya Parampara. So there is no such thing called written rules actually, but people actually just follow it. I think it was very common even in India also. This Guru Shishya Parampara, there was no such thing called as it is a rule book. I think the Guru explains the things and Shishya follows it. The same system existed even in Toyota also. But when the Toyota started expanding to various other countries and the culture, they found that there should be some kind of a common values which everybody should be able to understand. I think Mr. Raghuraman was mentioning about the value system and the purpose. So I think here, this is where it was coined as Toyota Way 2001. The entire DNA of Toyota was summarized in these two important things called as continuous improvement and respect for people. I think the continuous improvement has got little technical aspects which deals with taking challenging assignments and doing continuous improvement and go to the facts, go to the place where things are happening and do it. But I think the second important thing I would like to say is, which is very apt to this today's evening topic, is respect for people. Now, I think this respect for people is a very, very interesting thing, because I learned it over a period of time. I was seeing that respect for people means just wishing them and saying very nice, talking very nicely. It is not so in Toyota actually. Respect for people actually has got a different meaning. which is the second portion, which I feel it is a total employee involvement and empowerment. So now I would like to explain a few things. Basically, I think every company must and should have the value system for a long-term survival of the company. And I think the important point which Raghuraman was mentioning was about the purpose. I think this is most of the companies do have this vision and mission system, but how these are actually realized into the day-to-day work. I think that's what Toyota has been forefront in trying to drive this across the people. And it's another example for me was on lead by example. I think I have heard a lot of stories, and we have even have the movies on this. When I think there was a serious crisis in Toyota Motor Corporation about, I think it was oil crisis, and there was a labor strike, and it was basically, it was a big issue. And then who actually had to lead? It was actually the top of the company, which person had to leave first before he can ask others to leave. And this was a very, very big learning, and that's where the real union and management, the issues were realized, and also they also framed that they are the two wheels of the vehicle. Without one cannot run without the other. So here it comes basically the beliefs, philosophy, and common values. And what you see here is a past president of Toyota Motor Corporation, is Fujio Cho, who coined this, what is called as Toyota Way, realizing that the value system has to be across across all continents and cultures. And through this, I think what we call as HRD is not a department, we call it as Human Resource Development. So it's a very key message, which I have learned it through this, is lead your subordinates through thorough communication. I think one important point, even Raghuraman was mentioning, how do you communicate? How do you make sure people understand your purpose or the purpose of the company or the existence of the company? I think this is very, very important from even my experience, that if you are not good at communication, and here my experience is communication doesn't mean I inform somebody, I tell somebody, that's it over. So for my experience, my own personal experience, I have given one very nice example. It's a communication between mother and child. How even a child, if he's not able to speak also, the mother understands what is the need, and the other way also. So this is one area where even though you don't know the language, but you are able to communicate. I think we think that language is the only one, but it's not so. So understanding it's your subordinates, empathizing with them and trying to give them the support is what it makes a thorough communication. And second important thing is to unlock potential is assigning subordinates a challenging work. And it's not just assigning, it's also seeing it through. So that means the leader has got responsibility to actually see it through, supporting it and facilitating it. Of course, not doing this job directly, but it is important that he needs to do it. And important thing is slightly challenging work. What it means actually, in my experience in the last so many years, is you are able to do a certain level of tasks. And when you're assigning the task to your subordinates, you have to give it slightly little above that, or not too high, because you should not make your subordinates fail in his job. It should not become too like we call it as muri, or very difficult, cannot achieve. So slightly, assigning a slightly challenging work and seeing it through. So this is what creates some kind of a motivation and a confidence in the subordinates that he's able to now next time challenge the next level of. So this is what we call it as a continuous improvement and challenge, which is there in the first pillar of Toyota Way. So this is actually happens in a day in and day out. So these are things that actually Toyota Way is like a philosophy value system, but actually these are concretized into what is called as Toyota business practice. How to put the Toyota Way into actual practice down to the level of working level, even at the shop floor level or the lowest level of people. So these are some of the things. I think these are very nice things, but however, let me talk about total employee involvement. Now, one important thing which came out was respect for people. Now, I just said respect for people doesn't mean just wishing him and taking care of him, but it's actually respecting human ability to think and contribute. I think here one point Mr. Raghuraman mentioned, that self-worth. Self-worth comes out from giving respect to the people for their thoughts and for their ideas and how they can contribute. This is where I feel their self-worth actually enhances. And some of the examples of which are followed, probably these are all followed in almost all industries, but it's all called as a cross-functional quality circle. It's not just the quality circles what we have, but how do we actually bring in other functions into one circle and try to achieve some, the one which are impossible to achieve. Similarly, in Jishuken, we call this as, it's actually a Jishuken, nothing but is a self-learning. This QCC and Jishuken are nothing but basically self-directed teams. I think this was also one of the important points which Raghuraman mentioned. So here my experience says that when you are in the same environment and trying to do the activity, probably your ability to identify the, the potential which exists for improvement is less. So it's better that you see from a different angle, another's viewpoint. That means it's always true that, so for example, if somebody else walks into Toyota and tries to see things, his viewpoint, his questioning, his the suggestions will be far different and better than the people who are working in Toyota. So this is what we mean by Jishuken, where we make sure that the cross-functional people are brought in and they are assigned the task of course, it could be anything. It could be about 3 days or 7 days. So we have, of course, defined steps to do it. But my experience says that this kind of an activity unlocks the potential of the person. I think he was mentioning about Rangoli and so many examples. Here I found one example, an operator is able to identify the things which are not able to be identified by an engineer for improvement. And we could find through this exercise, he was so good in the CAD, which we were not knowing. And through this activity, he was able to draw, design, fabricate everything by himself, which was not, even we could not realize. So what we realized is if you are facilitating this kind of an environment, probably unlocking the human potential is going to be immense and it is going to be unlimited also. Next, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, these are some of the few examples where our own people at the lowest level have designed, developed the various kind of low-cost automation. They were able to actually demonstrate in the international exhibitions held in Japan. And I think this is what I mean by there is something called as monetary motivation and a non-monetary motivation. So what we have realized, my experience is monetary motivation will take you to a certain level. And beyond that, I think it's a self-worth. What Raghuraman has put it. It's very true. Now, how do you make the person more valuable because of his power to think and contribute? I think these are very important. So we create what is, of course, I think every industries are trying to create this, Kaizens, competitions and QCC and all. But the important thing is how much emphasis the top management is willing to give for that. In our case, we have what is called as a dedicated time taken out from the production time, about 1 hour per week. It's most of the companies, they try to do it off the production time. But this is the commitment. This is the commitment from the top management that you mean what you say. So this is one thing. Similarly, of course, we say that we have the best talents, and how do you make them come out of the best talents? That is, of course, various programs are conducted. It's like the Kaizen also, it's a scrap buster champions, we call it as environment, where people are given their free hand to look at all the scraps in the generated in the company and try to see what value they can create from it. I think these are some of the things from my experience, which really emphasizes or really strengthens my thinking that the human potential is unlimited, provided there is a good facilitation and empowerment given by the top management to the people. And finally, these are some of the beliefs which I showed, but my beliefs are also, personal beliefs are, people are good, there are no conflicts in reality, and there are no complex systems in reality. I think with these three fundamental beliefs of my own, and which is in parallel to the Toyota way, I would like to now hand it over back to Raghuram.
Prakash, really appreciate the inputs. I think it's brilliant. I think Japan is one country which has kind of lived this principle of unlocking human potentials. And for a country of its size, I think it has made a phenomenal progress because of the way it has made everyone productive part of their economy. And I think Toyota is one company which kind of bottles it up into a amazing global phenomena. So great to hear your stories. I think they have achieved it with scale, and I think the challenge for India as a country is how do we bring the spirit into our people, and how do we make the entire population contributing economic force. I think that's a challenge in front of us as a country. From there, I next wanted to move into the next lesson. So the first one was about purpose. The second one was about self-worth and how do you unlock it. I think the third one, I think, which we have learned is of the policies. At the end of the day, we are dealing with a set of people that all of us put policies and rules and just regulations in place in order to how do we guide and how do we control people, and that's basically what we do. But my personal experience is, you can have any policies, anything, but I guess there's nothing better than human conscience. And I think that has to be the best policy. You can have any situation behind you. But finally, if what we are doing is not consistent with what we think is right, or if it is not consistent with what we would want to be done to us if we are in the same situation, then that policy is not going to stand. And so I feel that, human conscience is the best policy. And, I would like to illustrate this with a small framework, and then we will get into some nice examples which I've seen in my life. There's a classic dilemma in all this. Yeah? So one is, on the one axis is autonomy. There's a high autonomy or a low autonomy across one axis, and on the other axis is discipline. It's a high in discipline and low in discipline. Yeah, I think this is the challenge which we face even with kids when we start bring them up. Too much autonomy, if great, but the kids tend to become indisciplined. So our fear always is this. It starts from here. Yeah? So all of us are afraid that we will land up in this box. Too much freedom and too little discipline. I think we start with the challenge that, this is where we are going to land up. Because we are afraid of landing up here, we then land up going here. What do? We then start adding rules, discipline, this, that, and everything, and start putting constricts around people. And we are hoping that we will get high discipline. But what we don't realize very often is we slowly lose away the autonomy and the empowerment in the process. And then we land up having a lot of discipline and too little autonomy, and a lot of rules, regulations, and everything. You get a sign, let this thing signed and that thing signed, so many things. But after some time, what we realize is we eventually drift into this, because once we have lost the autonomy and empowerment, and once you have gone into a high discipline area, over a period of time, it's very difficult to maintain the discipline. And then people actually eventually drift into the lower box, and we land up in the red box. And many organizations which have eventually landed in the wrong place actually have gone through this cycle, and it's actually a vicious cycle. Fear of autonomy, therefore put too much discipline. That discipline doesn't hold good, and so therefore it eventually deteriorates into very poor performance, whereas the sweet spot actually lies here. Yeah? How do you actually bring this alive in the way we run our systems and policies, and the way we run this, I guess, is one of the biggest challenges. And I think the organizations which are successful are able to do this very well. It's easier said than done, but I would like to explain with a couple of examples to bring the story a bit alive in a better way. The first one is about, when I was in Pons, I learned it the first time in Pons. It actually had individual reward system. I'm talking about 1997 to 2003 is when I was in the Pons factory, and then it shifted. It used to have individual reward system for every worker. The worker in the shop floor was rated. He was transparently told what his rating was and why he was rated what he was rated. And that was, and the job of the supervisor was to transparently share it with him. And use that sharing and that engagement opportunity to actually help that person become better. And, that's what it is. over a period of time, when you run it with a lot of judgment and not as a way to reward and punish people, but as a way in which you can actually develop people, when you do it that way, then it was possible even then to work with people at that level and land to them a differentiated reward mechanism. Yeah. And some of the best people, and people would easily accept that, yes, this person is really good, and no wonder that he's getting rated higher. Yes, his contribution is more, but then I also have a role to play and I get rewarded for what I do well. So there's a very, very transparent process which used to be actually communicated, and it used to run very well. I would like to actually take it, while this was a typical process of reward management for people, I'd actually like to take it into a very different experience, which is an exception handling. There's a very unfortunate incident in 2002 when I was in a factory in Pondicherry. A worker died on the road, and it was 5 o'clock in the evening, going home. A guy just back from office. The factory used to be just off the highway. In the highway, rash driving by the opposite bus which came in the opposite direction, banged into him. He tried to avoid a cyclist who came from the side and banged into this guy, and unfortunately he died on the spot. It was 5:15 in the evening, and the guy was dead. Such an unfortunate incident, and funeral happened and everything. And then we put up he was one of the best workmen in the factory. We actually, from the factory side, we communicated to the management saying that no such a thing has happened, and there is a loss of life. He was one of the best of our workmen. This has happened, and we were all feeling very shaken. That factory started sometime in 1985, so this is the first loss of life of an employee in the factory, and people were also quite impacted. So we actually gave this message. The first question which was asked was, and then we said, while the agreement was there and there was a particular amount of money which was supposed to be paid, we said that, that money is not enough and we should do something different for this family and whatever it was. So the first question which was asked was, the money is all fine, but does the family know, the surviving wife, what is the size of the family, and is the surviving wife, is she capable of handling a financial, kind of money which you give her, or will someone cheat her and take away all the money and leave her with nothing? Because is she even savvy enough to do all that? So, luckily we knew something about the family, so we had actually shared all the details, and then the company gave, what was told to us at that time was, we created actually a trust for the family. There were 2 kids to be educated. The kid at that time, the elder one was 4 years old and the younger one was 1 year old. The company created a trust in which the company deposited some money, and then it made 3 people from the factory as trustees to run the trust for 18 years till the kids went into college and the family was completely self-sufficient. So we were not just giving them money, but the factory, the 3 people in the team formed, which was made responsible for the family to stay safe and do well for the next 20 years. And last year, the trust was dismantled because the kids have all grown and they've all got jobs now. And so they just dismantled the trust and gave back the entire corpus back to the family at this time. But just to say that, these are the kind of things which you do. When we do something like this, we are very worried that, we are breaking the rules and doing something different. And what happens if people start exploiting this and everyone wants something like this and it just walks us into a trap? I think that is where the point of judgment, engagement, and running it with a consistent policy comes into place. It's possible to communicate to people that, we need to do these things with a lot of responsibility. We could show to people that when we say something, it is with authenticity and with genuineness that we are trying to do. And no one after that try to misuse something like this. First of all, no one wants to die. And even when situations were very different, a diametrically opposite situation happened. Someone else in the factory, it's a very, very unfortunate case where that person was extremely, unproductive. He was a troublemaker, and eventually that person got into alcohol and then he died. No one even said that we had to go and help them, because they said it is a self-inflicted thing, and we've tried so much to get the person back on track. He refused to come back on track. It's fine, we can't help that family in this situation because this is not what is good for us. It is possible to bring judgment not just from the management side, but it is also possible to lead people in a way that they can self-manage themselves, take the right decisions, which is good for them in the long run. Yeah? That is the power of communication. That's the power of leading them with purpose, so that they feel that here are a set of people who are doing things which is good for us, and it is our responsibility to behave in a mature way and not do something which is detrimental for us in the long run. I think that is the power of running a place with a lot of human conscience. This is the first example I would like to share. So there is something around. The first thing I said was differentiated reward, and second was in a very different way of handling exceptions and very different results. Another amazing example which I had personally seen in my life was, it created a policy of giving educational scholarship to people. So we used to get school kids, employees' children who used to go to school. Somewhere in their 8th standard, we used to spot bright talent and various things. People used to do very well in school, and we used to bring them into the factory, and we used to start giving them some awards and some small, very, very small token scholarship. It is that kind of, it's a small thing, but it made such a big impact for them that, each one of them and their family started feeling that we used to bring the family of the parent who's actually doing well, family of the kid who's doing very well, the entire family on day to the factory and run a small award function. It slowly created such a fantastic virtuous cycle that today it's a factory of 250 employees. And today in that factory, it's an amazing experience to see 12 of the kids have become doctors. And actually, the first one to become a doctor was actually a woman. And out of the 250 workmen's kids, 12 kids are doctors and 55 kids are engineers. Yeah? I think, we all keep talking about how do we create social value and how do we create, improve the society. The purpose of a factory is not just not to make money for itself or to make money for the company, but also to make an impact on the lives of the people who are around them, and whether it is a society or whether it is the employees. And these do not take too much money. It just needs that imagination, and it just needs that level of engagement to make it happen. And this is what is possible. This is what creates human value and eventually creates sustainable growth in the society. And when we are able to do all this, the level of productivity which the factory brings in, and the level of engagement which the people bring in to continuously learn and continuously solve problems and keep a place relevant in the long run, I think that's fantastic, and that's what actually unlocks value in people. And this is another great example of HR policies driving differentiation. While all this is great, these are all positive sides to everything, but we are not always gifted in landing with always good situations. Very often we, as practicing managers or practicing leaders, get into situations where things are not as good. It's quite possible that a place which was run very well got into something which is bad, and for various reasons, external influence, a patch of bad leadership, something else happens. Things do go bad. It's not that they don't go bad. Yeah? Very often we walk into situations where we take over a role where the place is not, has a history which is not to our liking, and what do we want to do? What do we do in such a situation? And how do we then create this virtuous cycle? And how do you cut the vicious cycle? I think is an equally important lesson. If you take any population, and a very typical thing is a normal curve. There are some people who are always A-listers, who are in the right extreme. They are the greens, who are always very good performers. They always do well. And there are some whom you would find in the bottom and who are very difficult to deal with, and who are the real troublemakers and whatever else it is. And there's a huge middle, which is basically the 60%. 20 here, 60 in the middle, and then there's another 20 here. That's why I call it a 20-60-20 rule. And one of the philosophies here is, very often what happens to us is we all spend disproportionate time in managing this. And in the process, we walk more and more and into traps, and we dig deeper and deeper holes. Whereas one of the things which we have learned the hard way is, you first start, when you have the A-listers, the first thing is you start reinforcing them with some kind of rituals, various things, whether it's a small recognition, whether it's a small reward, communicating what they're doing well, various things with which you actually reinforce them and make the people start realizing that this is the behavior which is good, which is wanted, which is good for them. And the people in the middle eventually, in any bad place, if you go and see, the people in the middle are actually swaying towards this side. And in any great team or in any great place, you would actually find that the people in the middle are actually swaying towards this time. I think, when you actually lead the place, reinforcing these people, you slowly get into a place where you are able to actually take the masses and move them towards the top instead of moving them towards the bottom. At the same time, we also need to deal with the people in the bottom. There's no doubt about that. Our aim is to contain their influence so that they don't spread here. They don't become the examples where the good people, the people in the middle want to go here. How do you prevent this influence from happening? And how do you make them go this side? And various things. It involves sometimes very harsh decisions, including sacking people. I've gone so many times to court, got people out of the way, and doing that in a way that the people here do not feel threatened, but people here feel that yes, this is being done in order to make this place better. And this is the right thing to do in this situation. How do you communicate? How do you make this happen? I have found this 20-60-20 a very, very powerful lesson, and have found this work in various situations, whatever we have gone into. Recently, you might have heard a video of Simon Sinek, actually, who talks about in any place, it is here. And if you can actually sway them into this side, that's basically where you can actually create a large pool of people who are actually working towards your purpose and your vision, and creating value for yourself, the organization, the employees, and the stakeholders. And I think this was a very important lesson for us to learn as we ran the organization. How do we do all this? And another very practical example was, we all, it's not about some fancy policies. It's not about some fancy events, fancy, amount of money to be spent on all these things. I think like what Prakash was saying, self-worth is in that every quality circle meeting. It happens 24/7 in every interaction, in everything. When you bring that sense of self-worth and that sense of recognition into people in a responsible way, it actually starts unlocking value. And you're not looking at big things, but small actions which actually cumulatively make a huge difference in the long run. I still remember one of the best supervisors of the factory was actually retiring, and at that time we had actually asked him to summarize his lessons of the last so many years of his life, and then say what makes us a successful supervisor to run a place. So this is the lessons this was the summary which that guy gave after 40 years of being a supervisor in a factory. He said, first one is engage with people genuinely. So never try to manipulate them. When you're trying to differentiate, when you're trying to run a differentiated reward system, when you're actually trying to do anything with people, do it genuinely and with authenticity. Genuinely care for them and deal with them with authenticity. Simple examples. One, if a fellow doesn't come to work today, tomorrow when he comes to work, his message was, after you distribute work to everybody else, take him on the side and ask him what happened yesterday and why you did not come to work. Is there a problem? Not to say you are not coming to work, I'm going to punish you, but to say, is there a problem? Are you having an issue? Do you want any help? If someone doesn't come to work for 2 days in a row, calling home and finding out, is he okay? Is there a problem? Never to find out why is he not coming to work, but always to find out, does he need a help? Even if the person is actually taking a leave out of laziness or out of misbehavior, when the person knows that there is someone who is caring for him and he's not just a brick in the wall, but if he doesn't go to work, there is someone who is bothered that he didn't come to work and is checking to find out if things are okay. Yeah, that simple act of dealing with a situation like this genuinely, there's so many such opportunities which we can do, which can actually help us to create that sense of belonging and that sense of caring. The next one is catching them do small things right. whether it is a quality circle, whether it's a small reward for, there's a quality day, there's a safety day in each one of those things, recognizing the best quality circles, sending the best people to Kaizen competitions where they go and win and they come back, showcasing back in the place that, look, these guys, when they did this, they got an award, and creating that sense of, you do a good work, you are rewarded. What you do matters to us. We are so proud that this is what you are doing. I think is a major sense of how it unlocks value. Similarly, one of his messages to us was, sir, every time someone does well, does something good, the next time when a senior manager walks into the factory, we should take that senior manager to him and make him recognize the work he has done, so that that guy feels that what work he does is just not a waste, that there is someone who's looking at it, everything that person does, and is recognizing him for that. Yeah. And the third one is engaging beyond work. No one is just a number who is just coming to work because you pay him a salary. So, engaging with them in their personal life, if there's a small function in the family, go and visit them regularly. There's literally not a single family function in those good places where someone wouldn't go, visit, be there, because for many of them, someone senior coming from the factory is their sense of self-worth. And that's basically why this is very, very important. And when that happens, you slowly start creating a much stronger level of involvement and a much stronger level of performance eventually. And all of this eventually gets back into performance because people feel good, the psychological safety is good, they feel wanted, they contribute more. Yeah. The other thing was the entire factory itself is a community. Yeah. So various things happen, whether it's a family day, whether it's Saraswati Puja, the Ayudha Puja happens, various things. Each one of them, are they just a tick in the box, which we are actually doing? Are each one of these done with our heart and with authenticity and genuineness? I guess this creates that virtuous cycle of employee engagement, which in turn creates performance, which in turn creates social value and economic value for the factory. I think, this is what I wanted to land. Small actions taken daily, consistently, with a purpose which is anchoring it, creates huge economic value eventually in the long run. And, these are all the pictures of some of these factories where people do these things too. Everything, all the decorations, everything is done by the workmen. It is a practice in many places, which actually helps them get engagement, and when done well, eventually creates huge value for everyone socially and economically. With this, I would actually like to pass on and call Mr. Pandit to actually share his insights, because Mr. Pandit has led a lot of teams in very different circumstances. While I spoke so much about a factory kind of an environment, equally challenging environment is a sales system where people are distributed. They are working in a very, very large geography with very, very little supervision. And how do you unlock value when you are dealing with people in that kind of an environment? It would be great to listen to Mr. Pandit share his insights in this space. Over to Mr. Pandit.
Thank you very much, Raghu. It is always a great pleasure to speak at the MMA events, MMA forum. And I would like to thank Mr. Balraman, Group Captain Vijay Kumar, and Raghu for having me on this panel. What I would like to be talking about is how do you unlock the potential of a different group of people. And these are the salespeople, what one would call sales force or field force. And I'm going to share my experience, my views based on long experience in managing field force in bonds and later on in the telecommunications mobile industry. But most of my thoughts about how to unlock potential in this group of people is from my experience in bonds and highly relevant to the FMCG industry. But I think some of these insights may be relevant to other industries as well. Now, what are the unique characteristics and challenges that the field force faces in their day-to-day work? And Raghu alluded to some of them in the introduction. First and foremost, they are located in places which are far away from either the regional offices or the head office, definitely. They do not get in touch or contact with the head office people or the regional office people on a day-to-day basis. In those days, they would meet the supervisor or the sales managers 2 to 3 days in a month, and definitely visit the regional office maybe once a quarter, and somebody senior in the head office much less frequently. Of course, the technology today may have changed the scenario. It may be possible through today's technology to keep in touch with people more often and more frequently. But in those days, this was one of the big challenges. Secondly, they work in very difficult conditions, whether it is the hot summers, cold winters, rainy seasons. They have to be on the move. They have to be out in the field. They have to travel by train overnight. They have to travel by buses, and many of them travel by vans. Highly difficult travel conditions. They have to be away from their families. Many of them were away from their families for 15 to 18 days in a month. And transportation was not easy that they could come back and visit their families at any regular intervals. And finally, and equally importantly, they used to face rejection every day. What I mean by that is that the salesperson called on about 25 to 30 retail shops in a day, and in about 15 shops or more, they would say, please go back, I have nothing to offer you. So this constant rejection on a daily basis was something that the salesperson had to face. So these were unique challenges, and this made a salesperson's life, a salesperson's work, extremely difficult. How do you motivate? How do you unlock potential in a group of people like this? And I must tell you that Ponds, we had one of the highly motivated, engaged, productive sales team. And in fact, a large part of our success in the marketplace was due to the efforts of our sales force. And that's the reason every one of the people joining Ponds in marketing spent the initial several months and sometimes several years in the field working with the sales team. So how did we really motivate this group? First, there were 4 points actually, and the first of this was compassion and care. And as Raghu mentioned, one of the pillars of this was that we treated them like human beings. We treated them like people. We understood the difficult challenges that they went through. It was not just one individual, from the chairman and managing director to the last person in the organization recognized the challenges and the difficulties that the salesperson went through, and were compassionate, were caring in dealing with them. So whenever a salesperson had any personal difficulties, family problems, we gave importance and credence to it. And I can give you examples like Raghu mentioned of an accident of a salesperson. And we took care of his entire family. In the interest of time, I don't go into too much of detail, except that we ensured that the family was well looked after and children were taken care of, his spouse was taken care of. And this was not just one case, there were several cases in different magnitudes. We had no HR. The sales managers were the HR managers. That was one of the key messages we drove down to every single ASM, RSM, or even the national sales manager, that you people look after you. You sales managers look after your sales teams. How well you look after your sales team, how well you motivate, determines how successful you are. The second aspect of managing this team was focus on performance. While we were extremely compassionate and caring we also placed a great deal of emphasis on performance. There was regular monitoring of sales results on a daily basis, sales results for each of the markets that the salespeople visited, monthly sales, comparison against budgets. So the whole sales team was focused on delivering their goals. And in my view, this motivated them enormously. Achieving sales targets, achieving sales results gave them a big high. And those salespeople, we were doing well, and many of them did well, were really on top, feeling good about themselves. So getting them to feel good was driven through this performance. And the third was discipline. And I go back to the box that Raghu drew over there. And what I'm talking about may be slightly different from some of the principles Raghu enunciated. But this is typical of any field force. And that's why it's called a force. It's like your Fauji, armed forces, where discipline is extremely important. So we had a daily route plan, and the salesperson had to adhere to the daily route plan. We had a travel plan, monthly journey plan, and the salesperson had to adhere to the monthly travel plan. There was not much freedom given to the salesperson to deviate from it. While drawing up the plan every 3 months or every quarter, we consulted the salesperson. We took that person's inputs into account, whether you need to spend 5 days in this market or 3 days in this market. But once that's drawn up, they had to adhere to that without any deviation. Another key aspect of this third point is focus on integrity and values. One of the areas where we used to be really tough, take stringent measures, is when a salesperson was found not adhering to values of financial integrity with regard to dealings with the retailers or with regard to the authorized dealers. The fourth aspect of how we motivated and unlocked potential of this group was in recognition and reward. And in recognition, I go back to, again, some of the key principles that Raghu enunciated. We gave a lot of respect and a lot of recognition to the salesperson's contribution to the business. Again, right from the top of the organization to every single individual, we recognize that the salesperson made a huge difference to our business, contributed immensely to our business. And that recognition gave them a huge sense of self-worth. Now, in terms of rewards, financial rewards meant a lot to the salespeople. So there were two components. One was an incentive plan, which was linked to achievement of targets. And the salesperson could achieve, I don't remember the exact figures, but almost much more than their basic salaries by achieving sales targets. But equally or more importantly, we had sales contests. And these sales contests were really some of the great motivators for salespeople. And we used to circulate to the entire team, the rankings of persons who achieved, won the sales contest, won the first prize, won the various prizes in these contests. This was a huge motivation for the sales team. And they would talk about it to their families, talk about it to the entire dealer networks, talk about it to other colleagues. And this again, added to their self-worth, added to the feeling that they were a very, very important part of the organization. So overall, if I may summarize, there were 4 key aspects, maybe 5. 1, compassion and care for the salesperson. 2, focus on performance. 3, discipline and focus on values. 4, recognition of the individual self-worth, and linked to that, a reward system. Now, this may be different from Daniel Pink's model of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Of course, is common. Even here, the sales team had a strong purpose. may be different, but I think these were the driving forces. And I suspect even today, in any industry which has a remote sales teams, these would be some of the key driving forces. So with that, I will end my my thoughts, and over to you, back to you, Raghu. Thank you.
Really appreciate Mr. Pandit, and these are great insights. I think, same principles, but kind of deployed in a very different day-to-day task, which is sales versus manufacturing. I would now like to invite Mr. Shankar to share his insights, because the challenges of his industry are extremely different. You're talking about an IT industry where you're employing 2 lakh to 3 lakh people. So it's a very different challenge of scale, and how do we deal with these and those situations. But at the same time, I think Shankar has a very deep experience of dealing with a variety of industries and one of the most respected HR leaders. So some insights from Shankar, both in terms of HR principles as we speak about this topic, as well as specific experiences around how do we do this at a scale which is so massive.
Well, thanks, Raghu. Thanks, Prakash and Pandit. I think you guys did a fabulous job covering a lot of things. See, HR is always the bad boy, when in every company, whenever there is a problem, they say, oh, it is an HR policy, it is an HR system. And now it's good to hear people saying that, it's not about HR, it is what we are going to do. We are the ones who run the show. So that's life, because I think HR is one function which is interwoven across everything. Yeah. And it's always, because every decision that you take is people's decision, and therefore HR always comes in as a picture. Now, and I think there are 2 or 3 points I want to talk about. I mean, we can go on debating, but I just thought, for the interest of time, just 2 or 3 points. One is, how is it different in the service industry where the scale is huge? Yeah, when you look at a factory, it's maybe 2,000, 3,000 workers. When you look at a service industry, it's about 2.5 lakh employees. If you look at Infosys, if you look at a TCS, it's 4.5 lakh employees. So that's huge scale. Number one. Number two, about 30% or 40% of the people are not in your premises. They work in different premises. They're working on the client side. They're working on some projects. So they're somewhere else. And you don't see them. They don't even come and access your emails because they're on a client network, because they're working as if they're working for a client. So how do you access them also is a bit of a thing, because they're all sitting somewhere. They may be in Dallas. They may be somewhere else, working with clients. Yeah, so that's the other challenge. And number two, so those are the things. And number three, I think in the IT industry, one big change, while we have heard, is what one calls as change in technology, because you're working for a project or a client that will change, and what sometimes you need to learn something new to do something new. So therefore, it is not that you can continue to do the same job. You've got to, the half-life of a job is roughly about 3-4 years. After that, you'll have to do something very different. So that's broadly the 3 key things in the IT industry. So therefore, I think while there is a very big role that individual managers have to play, but there is also equally a role of the culture that the company creates, because that is what will enable the individual managers, like what Raghu mentioned or Pandit mentioned, to do the kind of things that they did in their factories. You need that kind of a culture, because now you've got hundreds of people all across. You don't even know who it is. They're sitting somewhere doing something. So you've got to really create a great set of managers, but you also have to create a great set of culture that will ensure that you have those leaders who take that responsibility. Now, let me give you one small example. And how do you do that? It's not easy. I think it'll have to be various things. Firstly, it has to start with the top, the values of the company. So every company has to talk about their values, and those values should talk about some of the key core things that are important to people. The second is what we call as the value proposition to an employee. Now, if you look at the mind of a young engineer who's come from an engineering college, who's worked 2-3 years, what does they think? I think they are, are they looking at long term in the company? May not be. Are they looking? So they are all saying, okay, 2 years, 3 years, can I do a MBA? 2-3 years, if I'm getting an on-site posting, look for it. If not, so those are their horizon is about 4 years, 5 years, and they'll keep seeing what are some of the things that are there. Some may choose different careers, some may continue, but it's all dependent on different things. So you got to really ensure that you take that career horizons in the 3 to 5 year kind of range for the young people, because they are very different. And what are the 3 things that they want? I think if you look at the kind of people that we hire, the 3 key things for them is career growth and learning. That's their first thing. They're saying every 2-3 years, I want to see some growth. I want to learn. So career growth is very important to them, and learning. Number 2 is they also want to work in a great environment, good teams, bosses. So that is the second big thing that they want. The third area for them is really compensation, and compensation linked to performance. They're saying, okay, if I do well, I want compensation. And therefore, because they see the market, they'll work for 2-3 years, they see what are the skills in the market, and therefore, compensation becomes important. So what we did, and one of the ways to really engage, is to create what we call as a value proposition. I'm just giving you a small example of what we did in Infosys, and other companies will have something similar. And when we did our own study, we said there are 3 things which are core as a value proposition from Infosys. The first one is to give them a job where they can make an impact, which is all this thing about purpose, meaningful, purposeful jobs where they can make an impact. So that's the first pillar of our value proposition. The second pillar is where we say you will have continuous learning and growth, and what we call in our own languages, your career will never stand still. So you got to have, that is very important in this industry, and you got to create that thing. And the third one is we say, listen, this will be a culture or an employee experience which you will value. So there are these 3 things. So the first one on this whole purpose is where we kind of do things like, the focus that we have, what we call is the vertical engagement. While the companies will do a lot of activities to engage because of the scale, the managers have to engage on the job, on the challenges of the job and what they are doing for the client. So create that purpose. And we also have various team events where they really say, okay, what is our purpose? What are we delivering to our clients? And they talk about it. So, and they do innovation stuff similar to what they do in Kaizen. We have got something called Be the Navigator, where they do basically the whole thing of kind of what we call as design thinking, understanding the problem of the customer and solving it on their own. So those are some of the things that we encourage them to do. On the learning, yes, career learning, we got to create lots of learning paths, encourage them, give them a lot of rewards. So they got to keep learning, and everything is online. In India, online learning is not very popular. People will take and they'll give it up because, we've seen that they don't do it. But now I think we've seen in the last 6 months, twice the number of people are learning. So therefore, learning is becoming important, and online learning is important. I think the third one is this culture. And our culture is about various things, about recognition, about ensuring that there is the teams that are there is the right managers, all of that we got to ensure that is provided. So to build a culture, I think companies have to create a value proposition and ensure that you train the right managers, you send the right messages, and the leadership kind of puts the focus on it. I think those are some of the things that we need to do at scale. So the difference between a factory and this is probably the mindset of people. While at the base they are same, but their career horizons are different. What they're looking for are different. And they're also somebody who you don't see every day. They are in different places. So how do you really manage it is a very big challenge. So I'll stop here. I think we can go on, but I think that's the first part about the issues in a services company. I think the second part I want to talk is the role of HR, because I think when we speak about all of this, the key thing comes with what does HR do? I think if you look at, in the end, HR's role is to create systems where you create managers like Raghu and Pandit and Prakash. That's the first thing, because you've got to get the right people who do this stuff. So you got to create the system where those are the people who are put in the right job. So you identify them, you train them, and that's the system. That's the first thing. The second thing is you got to really ensure there is a system where there is a culture. And I think that's where you create EVPs, you create, you talk about the learning, you create what are the core things, what is important to that group, and provide those as an ecosystem. But then it's still left to the manager to make all this happen. And therefore, you have to then train the manager. And that's very important. So those are some of the things that HR needs to do. There are lots of changes. I think Raghu spoke about that bell curve, roughly this 20, 60, 20. Now, if you look at most of the tech companies, they'll say, no, we don't want ratings, so therefore there is a big thing saying, why this, so therefore these are newer trends. For each of those, you need time, you need things, but there is now lots of thinking which says, maybe that bell curve is not right. Maybe there is a different thing that you got to do. So there are lots of newer ideas that all of us are trying to say how we can do that. But what is what cannot be ruled out, or what is the most important thing, is this conversation, the conversation with people. And that's where we insist on this, what we call as a vertical engagement of the manager, talking to people on what they need to do, how they need to grow their careers, etc. So again, I think we can speak. It's not an easy thing. It's a tough challenge. There are different things that we got to see. The mindset of people is continuously changing. So we got to also keep changing our systems there. We got to have culture where the managers and leaders are there who do the right things. So how do you really create the ecosystem for them to do it? All those have to be done. I think that's some of the role that HR has to play. So I'll stop here, and then maybe we can look at any questions and take them up.
Yeah. Shankar, thanks a ton. I think very different perspectives and very different challenges. It means, I think, and while we all marvel at the kind of scale we have achieved in this industry in the last 20 years, I think what has gone behind it is this, thinking which has actually created this kind of a scale which we have been able to achieve.
We need to wrap it up here.
Yeah, okay. I would like to end with this last slide. I think, it's a concept of the and which Kannan spoke about. I would like to request Mr. Balraman to kind of, pick up from here and wrap up the session as well as open up for Q&A.
Well, there's not much time for a Q&A. You see, the only point here to note is that we need to be both human-oriented and task-oriented. You have to be human-oriented because that is a fundamental requirement in India. Most of the people are from the poor backgrounds. They do not have a sense of self-worth. So if you give them a sense, if you recognize them as individuals, they are extremely grateful and they'll give their life for you. And under Maslow's hierarchy of needs, most of the Indians coming from poor families are in the affinity need spectrum. So you need to treat them as one team, and that is the maximum reward they expect beyond money. They expect recognition. Raghu, do you have any final words to close? Because today is the CSK and match with RCB. So people, we are losing people in the audience.
No, nothing specific, sir. I think we had I think this is a topic which is of a lot of importance for all of us, and continuously exploring this, I think, is an important imperative for each one of us as leaders and managers as we lead our teams on a daily basis. I think that's what I would like to end with. Thanks a lot for the opportunity, and thanks for everyone for staying online.
Group captain.
Yes.
Thank you.
You can take one question and then.
Yes. Yeah, we'll take one question which has come from the YouTube and that has been asked by Mr. Ravi Purushottam from President Danfoss. President Danfoss, also president of MMA, and he's traveling, so he's watching on YouTube. He says, should we not focus more on emotional intelligence instead of domain knowledge, as generally B2B is more domain?
Who is that addressed to? Who would like to take it?
Krish,
Okay, let me try and take it.
I think that's the right thing.
See, I think, both are important. So emotional intelligence is needed because you got to manage. As a manager, as leaders, emotional intelligence is very important. So I think that I think is key to develop. But, in different levels, I think different things are important. As you start the career, I think I would say domain knowledge will be very important for a leader as much as emotional intelligence. As they grow up the ladder, then more emotional intelligence and less domain knowledge. So I think it slowly become, and if you become like a CEO, it's much more emotional intelligence than domain knowledge because you're going to just work with teams. But when you're a first level leader, I think you need both equally. But I think, the importance of emotional intelligence is growing, given that you're dealing with people whose aspirations, whose things are changing much more. So you got to be much more conscious of that.
Thank you. We can take three more questions, one for each of the panel, and after that, you and I will not speak, Vijay. We'll just close. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. One more question which has come is psychological safety is important nowadays as a role of people leader. The personal leadership development for leaders is key. Kindly share your suggestions to integrate this part of people leaders' roles.
Who wants to take?
I'll just take a try at this. I think, like anything else, it has to start from the top first of all. I think it's the job of the top leadership to create an environment of psychological safety, create an awareness of this topic among the people who are actually leading people in the organization, and then create that positive cycle by spotting good acts of this being created and making examples out of positive cases, which slowly creates the environment of psychological safety and a virtuous cycle, which actually then helps more and more value getting created out of it. I think this is the way it can be practically integrated into any operating environment.
Okay. Two more.
There's a question from Mr. Krishna. He's asking, by asking the sales team to follow a strict schedule, are we not limiting their autonomy? How to convince them that the schedule is to be fit in their benefit? It's fair for their benefit, actually.
This goes to Lakshmi Narayan Pandit.
Yeah, a good question. Very good question. I think what we did was that while drawing up the schedule, we involved the salespeople. We involved the salesperson. We involved the supervisors. We sit together and draw up the schedule. So their inputs are valuable and taken into account. But once the schedule is drawn up, there has to be a very strong case to deviate from it. So it's like why should either the army or any of the defense forces or any services forces, why should they have discipline? Why not complete autonomy? Because there is a tremendous benefit in having that discipline. You take their inputs, but then follow it. That's what I would say.
Thank you. One last question.
One last question. This question has come from USA, from Mr. Bala. He says, I've been asked to write a reference for someone I sacked for incompetence. He is now so desperate for a job. What is the correct approach for me to take it now?
Mr. Prakash?
Sorry, sir. Can you repeat it? I lost it.
He has to ask. He has to do a recommendation for someone.
Be truthful.
What can you do?
He fired someone, and now he is written to him to give a reference, and he's very desperate for a job. What should I do? I fired him for incompetence.
Yeah, I think he would have fired him from his viewpoint of view about the incompetence, because the organization needs and other things may not be fitting him. So if he is able to fit himself in a different organization, I think he should not hesitate to give a recommendation for him, unless it is an integrity issue.
Krish, similar case, you would have faced quite a number of them. What's your views on this, Ms. Krish Shankar?
For me, no, I think, we have to be objective. I think the point is, everybody, I think if there is, you can say, listen, these are the things, has been his career, or these are some things he did. But in this role, he had these challenges, but overall, this is where it is. So you've got to just mention what is one or two areas that he was incompetent for in that last role, but also say what are some of the strengths that you've done over the years, so that you give a balanced report. And then people can make their own choice. I don't think you should be judgmental, but you got to be objective. Say that in that last job, these were two areas that he struggled with, but this is what it is. And then let the person take it up. Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Great, sir. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And as a token of our appreciation for sparing your valuable time, and we usually what we present is we give a couple of hundreds of marks on your behalf. Yes, we are going to present 400 masks on your behalf. This will reach a couple of NGOs and a couple of areas where the need is so much, because this is a way we thought very needy at the time. Thank you so much for sparing your valuable time, and all the people who are still watching, please, we have got a feedback. Kindly, your feedback is very important. I can assure you, I think the power play has only started. The power play